Chapter 1955. Jingyu's eyes were so beautiful. The woman who could tame a hungry wolf was so eye-catching. She had a charm that was hard to ignore. Xiao Qin's lips trembled as he thought about it. He wanted to say something, but after opening his mouth for a long time, he didn't say a word. He just stared at Jingyu with his dark eyes. Then, he lowered his head and walked out of the ice cellar. "Father!" Xiaobai stood at the door for a long time. When he saw Xiao Qin come out, he called out. Xiao Qin stopped and turned to look at Xiaobai. Are you going to take Mother away from the Imperial City?" Xiaobai pursed his lips and asked. When Xiao Chun heard Xiaobai's question, he lowered his head and didn't say anything. When Xiaobai saw Xiao Qin's reaction, he suddenly pursed his lips. "Then, when are you coming back?" Xiaobai asked as he looked at Xiao Chun with a burning gaze. Xiao Qin was stunned when he heard this. He looked into Xiaobai's eyes and put his hand on Xiaobai's shoulder. "You've grown up." After Xiao Chun said this, he turned and left, leaving Xiaobai standing there. The place where Xiao Chun put his hand on her shoulder seemed to be emitting a faint warmth. Xiaobai turned his head and looked at Xiao Qin's back as he left with his hands behind his back. He lowered his eyes slightly. In a long residence, Lu Miaoqiu and Shangguan Linglan secretly came to visit when they heard that Xiao Chun was going to take Jingyu to Miracle Physician Valley. "Xiao Chun, are you really ready?" Lu Miaoqiu was wearing very ordinary clothes. However, she had been in a high position for a long time and had a natural temperament. Even if she was dressed like this, it was still very clear. Xiao Qin glanced at the door behind him and lowered his head silently. He didn't want to say anything more. "You Ershi." When Lu Miaoqiu said Jingyu's name, she suddenly choked up. Then, she pursed her lips tightly and stared at Xiao Chun as she said, "Life and death are up to fate. You are left behind 2 children." Xiao Qin. Lu Miaoqiu didn't finish her sentence, but how could Xiao Chun not understand? "Don't worry, Your Majesty." Xiao Qin slowly lowered his head, nodded slightly, and remained silent. 9th Emperors. Shangguan Linglan also took a step forward. He looked deeply at Xiao Chun and said, "We are waiting for you at Tokyo." "Thank you." Xiao Chun lowered his head again. The sound of the carriage didn't seem to alarm anyone, but it also seemed to alarm countless people. In the Imperial City, the tightly shut doors of the shops hung with white cloths seemed to be telling of deep sorrow. Xiao Chun lifted the curtain of the carriage slightly and looked at the Imperial City that was getting further and further away. Finally, he let the curtain down coldly. "Lord Shitsi, Master has left with Madam." In the study, Xiaobai stood stiffly. In the end, he turned around silently to look at the empty courtyard. Under Interrogation Officer 11th's shocked gaze, he abruptly dashed towards the manor gates, mounted his horse, and galloped out in pursuit. "Lord Shitsi!" 11th Interrogation Officer's shouts came from behind, but Xiaobai's horse did not stop. That fine steed galloped through the entire street, but in the end, it stopped at the entrance of the street. The figure standing in front of Xiaobai was so familiar. "Where are you going, Lord Shitsi?" Xiao Yijuan was wearing a grayish-blue robe. He stood on the street with his hands behind his back, blocking Xiaobai's path. "Get out of the way!" Xiaobai shouted anxiously. Chapter 1956. "Xiaobai, what's the point of chasing after him now?" Xiao Yijuan looked deeply at Xiaobai and said, "Have you forgotten what your identity is? From today onwards, everything you say and do represents the Imperial residence and the 9th Emperors. Do you still not understand?" Xiao Yijuan's words were so calm, but it made Xiaobai's expression change little by little. "Lord Crown Prince." Behind him, Interrogation 11 also caught up. After seeing Xiao Yijuan standing in the middle of the street, he was momentarily stunned, then he nodded politely. "Let's return to the residence." Xiaobai turned his head and stared deeply in the direction of the city gates. Finally, he lowered his eyes indifferently, reined in his horse, and turned to leave. Xiao Yijuan lowered his eyes indifferently, bowed to Xiaobai, and said, "Farewell, Lord Crown Prince." Xiaobai's face darkened, and he didn't say anything. Behind him, Interrogation 11 was completely confused and quietly followed behind Xiaobai. After the 9th Imperial concubine was buried, The ninth emperor's whereabouts were unknown. However, there were no changes in the imperial residence. For the first time, Xiaobai stood in front of everyone as the master of the imperial residence. Just like the ninth emperors, he was also dressed in black and was incomparably cold. Shouldering the heavy burden of the imperial residence, he went to the imperial court to participate in politics. His performance was so strong that no one dared to look down on him. This was the foundation laid by his father. No matter what, Xiaobai wouldn't let this foundation be destroyed in his hands. Everything in the imperial city was as usual. The matters in the restaurant were taken over by Jing Lang and Feng Ju. Everything was so perfect. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Time didn't seem to have left any traces. The 4 seasons were the same, but someone had grown up in this year. In the Miracle Medical Valley, everything was so peaceful, yet not so peaceful at the same time. The Miracle Medical Valley was located in the middle of the valley. What was peaceful was the atmosphere, and it also revealed a very relaxed and happy feeling in the valley. "Daddy," a childish voice rang out. The man in black robes, sitting on the stone chair, slowly turned around. The figure that ran over with his short legs looked like he was having a good time. Xiao Chen frowned slowly. A year had passed, and Little Potato was already more than 2 years old. He could speak a little better and walked with great joy. He looked so cute and cute. It melted everyone's heart. "Zine, be careful." Ku air chased after Little Potato, her eyes full of helplessness. "Father." Little Potato obviously didn't want to talk to Xiao Chun. He opened his arms and pounced on Xiao Chun. Then he hugged Xiao Chen's leg and smiled contentedly. Xiao Chun looked at the kid hugging his leg and then looked at Little Potato's face that looked like a cat. Xiao Chen's frown deepened. What did he eat this time? Xiao Chun turned to Ku air and asked with a conflicted expression. He ate some sweet potatoes. When I found out, he had already finished eating, Ku air said helplessly. Xiao Chen's face darkened when he heard that. He looked at Little Potato, rubbing against his leg and rubbing his face on Xiao Chen's clothes. Xiao Chen's face was cold. He reached out and grabbed Little Potato's collar and lifted him away. "Daddy, hug, hug." Little Potato waved his small hands and looked at Xiao Chun pitifully. Xiao Chen's brows furrowed tightly, and he frowned unwillingly. Chapter 1957. He looked at Little Potato, who was about to cry. After a moment of silence, he said helplessly, "You can't rub your hands on my clothes." After Xiao Chun said this seriously, he reached out and took Little Potato in his arms. Little Potato suddenly laughed. He hugged Xiao Chen's neck and kissed him. Suddenly, Xiao Chen's face was blushed. Xiao Chen's face instantly turned ugly. He reached out and wanted to pull Little Potato away, but the kid hugged him so tightly that he didn't want to let go. Xiao Chen sighed helplessly. He didn't dare to use too much force and hurt the child. Ku air saw this scene and immediately covered her mouth and laughed. The ninth emperor looked very cold, but he was actually very gentle. "Ninth brother, wipe the child's face," Ku air said with a smile. She reached out and handed over the towel in her hand. Xiao Chun silently reached out and took the towel. He frowned and wiped the dirt off Little Potato's face. When Qinggu walked over with the child in his arms, he saw this scene. There was a faint smile in his eyes. In Qingji's arms, a pink baby was sleeping quietly. Compared to Little Potato's lively appearance, Little Watermelon was really quiet and scary. He didn't cry or make a fuss. He just slept all day long. He ate when he needed to eat and drank when he needed to drink. Looking at him like this made people feel very comfortable. Qinggu held Little Watermelon. In this year, Qinggu started a family and helped Xiao Chun take care of this child. Qinggu, who had taken care of Little Potato, knew best. Now, he was still taking care of Little Watermelon. The 2 children were really different. Ninth brother. Qinggu stepped forward and called out with a smile. "Yes." Xiao Chen responded and watched as Qinggu sat down beside him with the child in his arms. He then turned his head slightly and looked at the child. He calmly raised his eyebrows. Little Watermelon's eyes were very similar to Xiao Chen's, while Little Potato's eyes were very similar to Jingyu's. The temperaments of the 2 children were the same. One was very lively, while the other was very quiet. Little Watermelon is asleep again, Chinga said helplessly. Looking at the sleeping child in his arms, he turned to Xiao Chun and said, "Don't worry. Sleeping more is a good thing." Xiao Chun responded faintly. Little Potato pulled on Xiao Chun's hair with a playful look on his face. Xiao Chun frowned and reached out to put Little Potato down. However, Little Potato grabbed onto Xiao Chun's clothes and refused to let go. Xiao Chun was very helpless. They were clearly brothers, but why were their temperaments so different? Ha ha ha! Chinga saw this scene and immediately laughed out loud. His eyes were filled with joy. Kuer also laughed. It was very interesting to see the 9th Emperor's defeated expression. Senior brother, Valley Master is back. Just as Chinga and Xiao Chun were talking, a kind man ran over from afar. He rushed toward Chinga anxiously and joyfully and said excitedly, "What did you say?" Chinga suddenly stood up. His eyes were filled with surprise. He stared at the man in front of him and asked in astonishment, "What did you just say? Valley Master is back." "Yes, Valley Master is back." Master and Marshal Granduncle went to welcome him. The man who came to deliver the message said happily. Chapter 1958. Qing Ji's eyes widened in shock when he heard this confirmation. He turned to look at Xiao Chun and saw that Xiao Chun had the same shocked expression. His face was filled with joy and unconcealable anxiety. "Kuer," Xiao Chun called out. Kuer was stunned for a long time. She only turned her head when she heard his call and hurriedly went forward to hug Little Potato. She looked at Xiao Chun anxiously and said, "9th Emperors, Chinga, let's go." Xiao Chun said quietly before standing up and walking forward. Chingu also handed the watermelon in his arms to a maidservant beside him and quickly followed Xiao Chen's footsteps. They walked towards the ice cellar in front of them, which was strictly guarded. The person hidden here was naturally Jingyu. 1 year's time was so long, yet it felt like it had passed in the blink of an eye. Jingyu had silently hibernated in this ice cellar for an entire year. She seemed to be in a deep slumber and showed no signs of waking up. She was surrounded by a frozen white fog. When Xiao Chun and Chingu arrived at the ice cellar, Yuan Yang and Xue Hao were also there. Xue Hao, who had been traveling outside, seemed to have darkened a lot compared to when they first met. There was also a small beard on his chin, which made him look very comical. "Valley Master." Chingu and Xiao Chun bowed slightly to Xue Hao. "9th Emperors, we meet again." Xue Hao bowed slightly to Xiao Chun. Xue Hao looked like he had rushed back from a long journey, but his dark eyes were still full of spirit. Xiao Chun nodded silently. "Yuan Yang has already told me the details." Xue Hao straightened his body slightly and said calmly, "I can save a 9th Imperial concubine's life." Xue Hao's words were like music to Xiao Chen's ears. When he heard Xue Hao's words, Xiao Chen's body couldn't help but tremble. He looked at Xue Hao emotionally and was about to speak when Xue Hao raised his hand to interrupt him. "However, I have a condition before I save her." Xue Hao looked at Xiao Chun indifferently and said, "Please speak." Xiao Chun's expression gradually became more serious. He even used honorifics when he spoke. "Don't think that this is a simple task." Xue Hao narrowed his eyes and said, "I went out to wander this time, mainly to find the whereabouts of my brother. I searched bitterly for a year, went to many places, and inquired about many people before I finally found some news. My brother, Xie said he was going to avenge his father after we became sworn brothers, but he never came back. I've searched for him for so many years, and I finally found his whereabouts, but I can't bring him back." Xue Hao looked at Xiao Chun indifferently. "9th Emperors, the condition for me to save the 9th Imperial concubine is that you have to help me save Xie Qing." Xue Hao looked at Xiao Chun indifferently and said, "This is the deal I want to make with you. I never do deals that lose money." "No problem." Xiao Chun agreed without hesitation. When Xue Hao saw Xiao Chun agree so readily, he suddenly felt amused and said, "Don't you want to ask where Xie Qing is? I will save him even if I have to go to heaven or hell." Xiao Chun stared at Xue Hao and said. Chapter 1959. I don't need to go anywhere. Shuehao smiled faintly and said calmly, I just need you to make a trip to Miaojiang. Miaojiang? Xiao Chun frowned when he heard Shuehao's words. That's right. Shuehao slowly restrained his expression and said coldly, the people of Miaojiang captured Xieqing. What I want is for you to go to Miaojiang and bring Xieqing out unharmed. Xiao Chun was silent for a while before he nodded. I understand. Xiao Chun replied. Shuehao looked at Xiao Chun and said, Ninth Emperors, don't blame me. I've thought about it for a long time. Only you, the Ninth Emperors, have the ability to do this. However, even if I save the Ninth Imperial concubine, the chances of success won't increase. After all, the Ninth Imperial concubine has given birth to a child with different pupils. The Ninth Imperial concubine has become an ordinary person. Shuehao looked at Xiao Chun and said, Valley Master, I'll save her for you. Xiao Chun looked at Shuehao silently. His dark eyes revealed his silent determination. Shuehao stared deeply at Xiao Chun. Finally, the smile on his face widened. He nodded slowly and said, Okay, I've been waiting for you to say that. Yuan Yang, stay here. Everyone else leave. I'm going to save the Ninth Imperial concubine. Shuehao smiled and squinted his eyes as he looked at the person in front of him. Jingyu, who was lying on the ice bed, squinted her eyes slightly and said with a smile, Goo worms and poison coexist in one body. To be able to survive in a deadlock is really rare. I think the Ninth Imperial concubine is desperate for business. Shuehao sighed. Valley Master, can you save her? Yuan Yang looked at Shuehao carefully and asked. It's simple. Shuehao narrowed his eyes and said, You just have to force the 2 toxins out of her body. However, I can't save her alone. That's why you're here to help me. Yes. Yuan Yang's eyes widened when he heard Shuehao's words. He bowed and nodded. Shuehao said it so easily. If there was a slight difference between the 2 poisons, the consequences would be unimaginable. Others might not understand, but Yuan Yang did. It wasn't that he didn't think of this method, but he didn't dare to take the risk. Shuehao's method. On the ice of the ice bed. Right now, it's like ice and fire in her body, said Lin Feng. Shuehao looked at Jingyu and Yuan Yang helplessly and said, She's fine. Why did you freeze her? The Ninth Imperial concubine is still alive. You just have to put Lingji or ginseng in her mouth to prolong her life. After 3 days of acupuncture, you can guarantee that she'll be in the same state as if she's asleep. But you actually froze her. Shuehao shook his head and said, Perhaps the Ninth Imperial concubine could have woken up on her own. However, because you froze her, she fell into a deep sleep. Fortunately, Qinggu is still around to perform acupuncture. You also have to use a lot of spiritual herbs. Otherwise, she would have been frozen to death. Shuehao shook his head. Yuan Yang, who was standing at the side, wiped his forehead when he heard Shuehao's words. Chapter 1960. Yuan Yang shook his body violently. No wonder he always felt that he had done something wrong. Originally, he had thought that Jingyu was still alive and was about to wake up. However, the fight between the toxins in her body worried Yuan Yang a lot. That was why he had sealed Jingyu in ice. This would slow down the fight between the toxins in her body and buy more time for Jingyu. However, after hearing Shuehao's words today, Yuan Yang broke out in cold sweat. Suddenly, Yuan Yang broke out in a cold sweat. If the ninth uncle knew that Jingyu had been asleep for so long, the ninth uncle would go crazy on the spot if he knew that Jingyu had woken up a long time ago. In the ice cellar, the temperature of the furnace slowly rose. Shuehao squeezed Jingyu's arm. When he saw that Jingyu's stiff body was slowly recovering its softness, he heaved a sigh of relief. He closed his eyes and circulated his internal energy through Jingyu's body. It was as if he was stimulating the vitality in Jingyu's body bit by bit. The silver needles in his hand didn't stop, and he slowly moved them along the softening skin. Outside the ice cellar, Xiao Chun and Qinggu were waiting. There wasn't a single sound in the ice cellar. Xiao Chun's expression changed little by little. There was a faint emotion in his eyes that Qinggu couldn't see clearly. Ku Air hugged Little Watermelon while Little Potato tugged on Xiao Chun's sleeve. He blinked his eyes and looked at this and that. He didn't know what was going on and looked up silently. "Daddy," Little Potato tugged on Xiao Chen's sleeve and asked confusedly, "Is Mommy coming back?" When Xiao Chen heard Little Potato's question, he was stunned. He lowered his head and looked at Little Potato with narrowed eyes. Little Potato's face was so similar to Jingyu's. His deep eyes gradually softened. "Yes, Mommy is coming back." Xiao Chen's calm voice rang out. After he finished speaking, Xiao Chen's heart couldn't help but tremble violently. Then, that emotion became more intense. It was so intense that it was as if he could see Jingyu waking up. Over the past year, Xiao Chen had been thinking about what he would say to Jingyu after she woke up. What if she didn't wake up? He had thought about this countless times, but it was so intense at this moment. Xiao Chen's yearning after a year. His deep eyes stared intently at the door of the ice cellar, not daring to relax. "Ninth brother. Come. Someone will call for us after the Valley Master and Master are done with the treatment." Qing Ji's gaze landed on Little Potato as he said, "Little Potato is also tired. If ninth sister-in-law comes out and sees Little Potato being wronged, her heart will definitely ache." No matter what Qing Gu said previously, Xiao Chen was completely indifferent. Now that he heard Qing Ji's words, his expression suddenly became serious. He frowned slightly and lowered his head to look at the drowsy Little Potato who was hugging his leg. After a moment of silence, he bent down and reached out to carry Little Potato. Little Potato groggily called out, "Daddy." Then, he lay on Xiao Chen's shoulder and fell asleep. The satisfied look on his little face made Xiao Chen's expression soften. Chapter 1961. Let's go. Xiao Chen turned his head to look at the ice cellar behind him. Then, he silently returned to the house. He hugged Little Potato and watched him sleep peacefully. That small body and sleeping face were so similar to Jingyu's. Qinggu and Ku'er, who were outside the door, finally heaved a sigh of relief when they saw Xiao Chen's appearance. Ku'er lowered her head to look at Little Watermelon in her arms. Instantly, she furrowed her eyebrows. Little Watermelon had been neglected for the past year. Little Potato looked similar to Jingyu and had a sweet tongue. Little Watermelon, on the other hand, was just like Xiao Chen when he was young. He was also silent. When he woke up, he opened his pair of dark green eyes and looked around. That pair of dark green eyes made Xiao Chen furrow his eyebrows. When Little Watermelon woke up, he didn't even want to look at him. Obviously, Xiao Chen always felt that Jingyu became like this because she gave birth to Little Watermelon. Although Xiao Chen felt this way, there was one time when Little Watermelon was playing on the soft couch. He almost fell to the ground. If Xiao Chen hadn't been quick enough to catch him, he would have been done for. At that time, Qinggu and Ku'er clearly saw the expression on Xiao Chen's face. That pair of dark eyes were filled with panic. He protected Little Watermelon with some lingering fear. However, it was only at that moment that Little Watermelon opened his eyes wide and looked at Xiao Chen. That was the longest look in the history of father and son. However, it was only for a moment. After that, Xiao Chen threw Little Potato back onto the soft couch. It seemed that nothing had changed. However, Ku'er and Qinggu noticed that although Xiao Chen looked indifferent, he was constantly paying attention to these two children. There were countless times when he extended his leg to help Little Potato, who was learning how to walk, not fall. There were also countless times when he snatched sharp objects from Little Watermelon's hands. It was just that, in comparison, Xiao Chen doted on Little Potato more. Qinggu waved at Ku'er. Then, he silently lit up the incense in the house. The faint fragrance was very pleasant. Xiao Chen didn't care. However, after a short while, he felt an irresistible drowsiness. Perhaps it was because he knew that Jingyu would wake up, or because he had been worried for a long time, or perhaps it was because of this rare moment of peace. Xiao Chen looked at the child lying by his side and slowly closed his eyes. Over the past year, he had woken up from his dreams countless times. He had been unable to fall asleep while thinking about Jingyu. But now, at this moment, it was as if he had let go of everything and fell into a deep sleep. The fragrance in the house didn't disperse. The two figures, one big and one small, were sleeping so sweetly. Ku'er carefully carried Little Watermelon in and placed him beside Little Potato. Little Potato opened his eyes in a daze and fell asleep again. The way Little Potato protected Little Watermelon with his small hands made Ku'er's heart soften. She reached out to cover the three of them with blankets. Then, she quietly left. Asleep? Chingu asked softly after seeing Ku'er come out and close the door. He's asleep. Ku'er nodded slowly. There was a faint smile in her eyes as she said, It really wasn't easy. The ninth emperor's, he's too tired. Chingu nodded slightly. He sighed and reached out to hold Ku'er's shoulder. This time, he used the medicine to make ninth brother fall asleep. He was discovered the last few times. However, perhaps it was because ninth brother knew that ninth sister-in-law would wake up this time, so he let go of his worries. Chapter 1962. Otherwise, it's useless. Chingu sighed deeply as he walked forward. Ninth sister-in-law, you have to wake up soon. Chingu was incomparably resentful. This past year, he had been very tired. Okay. Xiao Chun had completely left the two children to their own devices. If it weren't for Chingu and Ku'er, the two children would have been raised by Xiao Chun as savages. You didn't see their posture. At the very beginning, they had to eat with their hands. Chingu sighed deeply. He had to make use of this time to have a good talk with Ku'er. He thought to himself that he couldn't let Ku'er give birth so early. Otherwise, she would have to focus on the children for the rest of her life. That wouldn't do. In the ice cellar, the door had been shut for a day. Now, there was finally some movement. The ice in the ice cellar disappeared under the furnace and turned into water on the ground. After Xue Hao inserted the needles, he used his internal energy to help Jingyu. Fresh blood dripped from the punctured fingertips. As the needles were inserted, the fresh blood slowly turned black. When the black blood dripped onto the ground, it seemed to be extremely hot. With a sizzling sound, it corroded a hole in the ground. SSS, what a terrifying poison. Yuan Yang's eyes widened when he saw this scene. He knew that Jingyu's body was highly toxic, but he didn't expect it to be such a terrifying poison. The moment the poisonous blood dripped out, Xue Hao's face turned cold. He suddenly reached out and slapped Jingyu's back. Pooh! Jingyu spat out a mouthful of black blood. There seemed to be something wriggling in the black blood. Yuan Yang moved forward quickly and lit a fire to burn the thing to death. Phew! Xue Hao quickly inserted the needles into Jingyu's body. After that, he let out a sigh of relief and said, It's done. Now, get her out of here. If nothing goes wrong, she should wake up tonight. Xue Hao was exhausted. He had used up too much internal energy to treat Jingyu. Now he was dizzy. If one looked closely, they would see that some of Xue Hao's black hair had turned white. Yuan Yang responded to Xue Hao's words. He quickly ordered people to move Jingyu into the room. A charcoal fire was lit in the room to warm up Jingyu's body. Both Xue Hao and Yuan Yang were exhausted and went to rest. A few disciples were left in the house to take care of Jingyu. As the night slowly darkened, Chingu and Ku'er, who had heard the news, came over to take a look at Jingyu. When they saw that Jingyu's complexion was slowly recovering, they immediately felt relieved. The Valley Master was indeed extraordinarily powerful. Jingyu had not woken up yet. Chingu and Ku'er took a look and left. The candlelight in the room flickered. Jingyu felt a warm feeling. After falling into a deep sleep, she finally felt this warm feeling. Her heart beat rhythmically. This feeling was very strange. Jingyu finally seemed to have found herself from her dissipating consciousness. Jingyu seemed to smell a faint fragrance. Then, her eyelashes trembled. Her fingers moved and her eyes, which had been closed for a year, slowly opened. The first thing she saw was a white curtain. Jingyu's eyes were dazed for a moment. Chapter 1963. Jingyu's blank mind seemed to be awakening a memory that had been dormant for a long time. Her eyes were also slowly becoming clearer. Finally, she moved her body, only to find that there was an indescribable soreness all over her body. It was as if she had overexerted herself yesterday. The soreness in her muscles made Jingyu exclaim softly and frown tightly. Jingyu smacked her lips and felt the bitterness from the tip of her tongue. This made her feel even more puzzled. Jingyu propped herself up and moved her stiff fingers. She opened her eyes and looked around. This place was very unfamiliar to her. What the hell was this place? Why wasn't there a single person here? Jingyu wanted to call out to Inxiao, but felt that her throat was very dry. She frowned slightly and stood up. She walked to the table and poured herself a cup of water. Just as she was thinking about how she got here, she saw the door being pushed open. A very young man walked in with a bowl of black medicine. The moment he opened the door, he saw Jingyu staring straight at him. He was so shocked that his hands trembled, and he almost dropped the bowl of medicine. Ninth Imperial Concubine, you're awake. The man stared at Jingyu in a daze for a long time before he asked in surprise. You are? Jingyu was stunned when she heard this and looked at this unfamiliar man in confusion. The 9th Imperial Concubine is awake. Master, Senior, the 9th Imperial Concubine is awake. The man was overjoyed when he heard Jingyu's question. He didn't even put down the bowl of medicine in his hand and rushed out with a look of surprise on his face. Jingyu was left standing there in a daze. What was going on? Did she transmigrate a second time? That couldn't be. This person just called her the 9th Imperial Concubine. Jingyu thought about it carefully. After she gave birth to little Watermelon, the accident happened. After the accident, her soul traveled to the modern world. Did she return to her original body, or was she in someone else's body? Don't scare me. Jingyu thought about it, and her body trembled violently. She quickly looked for a mirror in the room. If she had transmigrated into someone else's body, then she would be in big trouble. Jingyu thought about it, and rushed to the bronze mirror in the room. When she saw her familiar face in the mirror, she slowly heaved a sigh of relief. However, the pitch-black eyes in the mirror made Jingyu a little dazed. Jingyu's eyes suddenly didn't have any color. She wasn't used to it. You're awake. Where are you? When Jingyu was looking at herself in the mirror, she heard the voice outside. The person who appeared made Jingyu, who had just stood up, slightly stunned. It was the first person she saw. It was an old man with black hair mixed with white hair. Beside the old man was an old man with white hair. Qingge. Jingyu recognized who this person was at a glance. Her eyes curved slightly as she called out calmly. There was a faint questioning look in her eyes, and there was also a hint of inquiry in them. 9th sister-in-law, you're really awake. Qingge looked at Jingyu and was stunned for a long time when he heard Jingyu calling out to him. Then, as though he had encountered something incomparably joyous, he strode over excitedly. Yes, I'm awake. Jingyu looked at Qingge and replied with a faint smile. Chapter 1964. Let me take a look. The person standing beside Qingge was obviously Yuan Yang. He stepped forward and held Jingyu's wrist. After taking her pulse, he nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, the poison has been completely removed. This is? Jingyu was slightly taken aback. She turned to Qingge and asked, This is my master, Yuan Yang. Qingge quickly said, It was the Valley Lord and my master who saved 9th Sister. You are now in the Miracle Medical Valley, 9th Sister, 9th Sister-in-law. You have been unconscious for a year. I almost thought that I would never see 9th Sister-in-law again. When Qingge said this, he suddenly felt a lump in his throat. The feeling of seeing Jingyu alive and well again in front of him was too strong. Miracle Medical Valley, a year. When Jingyu heard Qingji's words, her eyes widened in shock. She suddenly thought of something and turned to Qingge and asked, Where is Xiao-chun? Where are my children? 9th sister-in-law, don't worry. Qingge smiled at Jingyu and said, They are all fine. They are now in the courtyard over there. I want to see him. Jingyu's heart couldn't help but tremble. She didn't expect that a year had passed after she closed her eyes. Jingyu had to see Xiao-chun and the children no matter what. She followed Qingge and walked forward. Qingge briefly explained what happened after Jingyu fell unconscious. 9th sister-in-law, 9th brother, and the children are in the house. Qingge stopped and looked at Jingyu with a deep sigh. Jingyu's heart tightened when she heard this. She frowned and walked forward. Jingyu gently pushed open the tightly shut door and walked in. Qinggu, who was behind her, saw Jingyu's actions and watched Jingyu's back as she walked in. He was slightly dazed and frowned deeply. It seemed that he was still in a daze. Jingyu really woke up. The corners of Qingji's mouth slowly curled up. Then, as his eyes lit up, the smile on his face widened. Jingyu walked into the room and walked towards the bed as if she was attracted by something. She could faintly see the figure that had appeared on the bed. That tall figure was lying on the bed. The black robe on his body had yet to be removed, and he was sound asleep on the bed. Those tightly shut eyes and that familiar face caused Jingyu's heart to clench tightly. She also unconsciously stopped in her tracks. Looking at Xiao Qin's face, which was full of longing, Jingyu's heart suddenly trembled. It was as if they had met in a different time and space. A very strange thought rose from the bottom of her heart. After this meeting, they would never be separated again. The feeling that rose from the depths of her heart was so strong that it almost made Jingyu burst into tears. Jingyu slowly steadied her heart and walked towards Xiao Qin again. Looking at the sleeping Xiao Qin and the two small figures beside Xiao Qin, Jingyu's heart was violently attacked the moment she saw them. The two children were sleeping so soundly that Jingyu could tell at a glance which one was Little Potato and which one was Little Watermelon. Little Potato was carrying Little Watermelon, while Xiao Qin's large hands were protecting the two children. Chapter 1965. This scene was just like what Jingyu had imagined countless times. She just didn't expect Little Watermelon to be a boy. There was a faint smile on Jingyu's face, and the corners of her mouth curved up slightly. Jingyu looked at Xiao Qin and the two children in a daze. Just as she was about to reach out and cover them with a blanket, she realized that Xiao Qin's eyebrows moved slightly. Then, under Jingyu's gaze, Xiao Qin slowly opened his eyes. Those pitch-black eyes were as deep and serene as ever. He opened them calmly and saw Jingyu. Jingyu also looked at Xiao Qin. The two of them looked at each other quietly, with a faint smile on their lips. The look in their eyes seemed to have calmed down at this moment. When the two of them looked at each other, neither of them spoke. The look in Xiao Qin's eyes widened little by little. Then, he reached out and slowly stroked Jingyu's cheek. However, just as he was about to touch Jingyu, he suddenly stopped. Jingyu was slightly stunned. She looked at Xiao Qin's complicated gaze and watched as Xiao Qin's originally surprised expression slowly returned to normal. Then, he retracted his hand and closed his eyes again. Jingyu looked at Xiao Qin's actions and frowned in confusion. So, what's going on now? Xiao Qin doesn't want to see me. Jingyu instantly frowned. Without thinking, she threw herself into Xiao Qin's arms. The force was so strong that Xiao Qin suddenly opened his eyes. He hugged Jingyu in his arms with some fear and opened his mouth for a long time without saying a word. Xiao Qin, you're not dreaming. Jingyu looked at Xiao Qin and her heart ached. If it weren't for her, how could Xiao Qin be like this? She thought that it was just a dream and didn't dare to touch it for fear that it would disappear. Jingyu looked at Xiao Qin, who was still in a daze, and frowned in dissatisfaction. Without thinking, she opened her mouth and bit his arm. Hiss! Xiao Qin immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Looking at Jingyu biting his arm and blinking her eyes, a strange feeling arose in his heart. This was real. Jingyu was back. You are. Xiao Qin's throat felt dry as he called out to Jingyu nervously. Xiao Qin. Jingyu arched her eyebrows and looked at Xiao Qin. Her dark and bright eyes emitted a dazzling light under the candlelight. Xiao Qin's face lit up little by little. Finally, he reached out and hugged Jingyu in his arms. The strength he used to hug Jingyu was so great that his heart was beating violently. The feeling of hugging Jingyu made Xiao Qin know that this wasn't a dream. Xiao Qin, my bones are going to be broken by you. Jingyu couldn't hold it in any longer and said as she pushed Xiao Qin's body. Xiao Qin reluctantly let go and looked at Jingyu with shining eyes. Suddenly, he smiled. That smile and those moist eyes made Jingyu's heart ache slightly. She reached out and hugged Xiao Qin's waist. You're finally back. Xiao Qin's heart was filled with satisfaction at this moment. Separated by life and death, he had regained what he had lost. What kind of feelings did he have when he spent the past year? Jingyu's heart ached when she thought of this. Chapter 1966. Xiao Chun, I'm back. I won't leave again. Jingyu hugged Xiao Chun contentedly and said, "This is my home. I only want to be with you." When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he tightened his grip on Jingyu. He buried his head in Jingyu's neck and smiled. While Xiao Chun and Jingyu were hugging, the two little guys next to them opened their eyes. "Daddy!" Jingyu was startled by their childish voices. She sat up and looked at Little Potato, who was sitting up. Little Potato was also staring at Jingyu. His black eyes were fixed on Jingyu. "Mother!" Then, under Jingyu's gaze, Little Potato suddenly called out "Mother" in a very serious manner, causing Jingyu's eyes to widen even more. You're calling me? Little Potato, you can talk." Jingyu's eyes were filled with joy. She reached out and hugged Little Potato in her arms. Her eyes were full of love. Yaya. Just as Jingyu was hugging Little Potato, Little Watermelon crawled over from the bed. His green eyes were looking at Jingyu, and he was babbling something. "Little Watermelon." Jingyu also carried Little Watermelon over. Looking at the two children in her arms, Jingyu's eyes were filled with emotion. They had grown up. Little Potato and Little Watermelon both stared at Jingyu curiously. Just when Jingyu wanted to play with the children, Xiao Chun, who was on the side, took the two children away in dissatisfaction and reached out to hold Jingyu in his arms. He hadn't hugged them enough yet. How could he let Jingyu take care of the children? "Stop fooling around. Let me take a good look at the children." Jingyu was full of joy. Xiao Chen's face darkened when he heard that. Was he not as good-looking as the children? This realization made Xiao Chun very vigilant. He looked at Little Potato and Little Watermelon with his dark eyes. They were so small. Xiao Chun was really worried that he would accidentally crush them to death. What was there to look at? However, the two children ignored him and crawled into Jingyu and Xiao Chen's arms. Jingyu and Xiao Chun played with the children for the whole night. It wasn't until the second half of the night that the two children tired out and fell asleep. Jingyu was very satisfied when she saw the children fall asleep. She carefully closed the door. She and Xiao Chun went to sleep on the soft couch in the outer room. Xiao Chun had slept for the whole afternoon, so he naturally didn't feel sleepy. However, Jingyu wasn't so energetic. She fell asleep in Xiao Chen's arms in a daze. Xiao Chun stared at Jingyu closely. Looking at Jingyu's face and listening to her weak breathing, his heart was beating. Xiao Chun didn't dare to close his eyes or sleep peacefully. He just looked at Jingyu quietly. He wanted to confirm that Jingyu was really back. She was really back by his side. Now that she was asleep, Jingyu would open her eyes if he called out to her. "You are." Xiao Chun called out deeply. Jingyu didn't wake up. Xiao Chun panicked and hurriedly called out again. Jingyu opened her sleepy eyes and looked at Xiao Chun. When Xiao Chun saw Jingyu open her eyes and hear her sleepy voice, he slowly heaved a sigh of relief. He reached out and hugged Jingyu. Chapter 1967. "I'm fine. Let's sleep." Xiao Chun gently kissed Jingyu's forehead and relaxed his body. At this moment, the thought in his heart became so real. Jingyu had really returned. She had returned to his side in one piece. This time, she would never leave again. Early in the morning, Xiao Chun abruptly woke up from his dream. Last night, he had a very vivid dream. In his dream, Jingyu had returned. Xiao Chun was slightly dazed. Just as he was about to reach out and rub his forehead, he realized that his arm was pressed down by someone. Xiao Chun's body stiffened slightly. When he turned his head, he saw that Jingyu was sleeping peacefully beside him. Just like the countless times she had woken up, Jingyu was sleeping peacefully with her head resting on his arm. Xiao Chun's eyes widened slightly. Last night's memories came flooding back. So it wasn't a dream. Thinking of this, Xiao Chun's heart trembled uncontrollably. He looked deeply at Jingyu's sleeping face and reached out to caress Jingyu's face. When he touched her face, it was soft and warm, unlike the bone-chilling cold he felt in the ice cellar. "Oh!" Jingyu slowly opened her eyes and saw Xiao Chun's burning gaze. She faintly curved her eyebrows and reached out to hug Xiao Chun. She snuggled into Xiao Chen's embrace and said contentedly, "I'm hungry." Okay. Xiao Chen's face also had a faint smile. When he got up with Jingyu, his gaze never left Jingyu as he put on his clothes. "Why do you keep staring at me like that?" After Jingyu tidied herself up, she frowned and looked at Xiao Chen with a conflicted expression. "The child is awake." Xiao Chen didn't say anything. Instead, he turned his head and looked into the room. "Okay." Jingyu responded and walked into the room. The two children were indeed awake. However, they didn't cry or make a fuss. This made Jingyu's eyebrows curl up in amusement. Looking at the two children playing happily on the bed, she shook her head helplessly. She reached out to put on their clothes. Then, Qinggu and Ku Er's voices sounded from outside. Jingyu turned her head and saw Ku Er walking in. Ninth Imperial Concubine. When Ku Er saw Jingyu, her eyes lit up in surprise and joy. She walked over with a face full of joy. "Ku Er, long time no see." Jingyu smiled gently at Ku Er. "Yes, it's the Ninth Imperial Concubine. It's been a long time since we last met. I see the Ninth Imperial Concubine every day." Ku Er held Jingyu's hand and said emotionally, "Ninth Imperial Concubine, you're finally awake." "I'm awake." Jingyu smiled at Ku Er and said, "It's a good thing that I'm awake. Why are you crying?" "I'm happy," Ku Er said as she reached out to wipe her tears. "Ninth sister-in-law." Qinggu called out from behind the screen. "Come in." Jingyu slightly arched her eyebrows and raised her voice. Only then did Qinggu walk in. It turned out that the meal had been prepared. Sitting at the table and looking at the bland things on the table, Jingyu was slightly stunned. She blinked and looked at Qinggu, but she saw that Qinggu had placed a bowl of medicine on the table. "Ninth sister-in-law, you've just woken up and haven't eaten for a year. You can't eat too much food. Also, you have to avoid spicy and oily food," Qinggu said seriously. "Also, you have to eat less and let your body get used to it." Chapter 1968. This is a decoction that Master concocted to help the body recover faster. Drink a bowl every morning, and your body will stabilize after half a month, Qinggu said calmly as he looked at Jingyu. "It's that troublesome?" Jingyu frowned slightly, but she still nodded in agreement. Ninth sister has been sleeping for a year with the help of spirit medicine. She needs to recuperate now, or else there will be serious problems, Qinggu said to Jingyu very seriously, afraid that Jingyu wouldn't take it seriously. "Got it." Jingyu nodded slowly, thinking that she had slept for a year without eating or drinking. It was really amazing. Ninth brother. Xiao Xiao walked over and sat down next to Jingyu. After Qinggu called out to him, he carried the two children down to eat. Jingyu had been very hungry for a long time, but she couldn't eat too quickly, so she ate while talking to Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun was also eating with Jingyu, but his eyes were always on Jingyu. "I was poisoned by Jingyan." Jingyu knew that she had been poisoned when she suddenly had a difficult labor and miscarriage, but she didn't know who did it. She only found out after asking Xiao Chun. "Yes," Xiao Chun said with narrowed eyes. "Jingyan was rescued by people from Yaojiang. Madam, Nye didn't die." As expected, Jingyu's expression turned ugly bit by bit. The person she saw at that time must have been Madame Nye. Jingyan was sent to the nunnery by Song. I was the one who sent her there personally. I originally thought that Jingyan should have died long ago, but I didn't expect her to have such great endurance and actually survive. Jingyu frowned deeply. I should have killed her when I found her. Xiao Chen's eyes were filled with coldness. If he had killed Jingyan earlier, there wouldn't have been so many things that happened later. Huh. Jingyu couldn't help but laugh when she heard Xiao Chen's words. She said helplessly, "If the person who did it wasn't Jingyan, it would have been someone else, so you can't blame Jingyan. The person who needs to die is Madame Nye." Xiao Chun nodded slowly, his expression unclear. "You just woke up. Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu and asked. "I'm fine." Jingyu blinked and said, "But I'm just hungry." Xiao Chun couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He looked at Jingyu and said, "Eat slowly." Jingyu nodded. After she finished eating, she raised her eyebrows and asked, "You've been in Miracle Physician Valley for the past year?" The godly medical valley was surrounded by mountains on all sides. This was really a good place to recuperate. Jingyu stood outside and looked at the mountain peak. Looking at the green trees, she immediately curved her eyebrows. Xiao Chun held Jingyu's hand. For the first time, he felt that this boring mountain peak and green trees had become interesting. Jingyu turned to look at Xiao Chun. She looked into Xiao Chun's eyes and said with a faint smile, "I went to my previous world and learned the truth about death. Perhaps I could have stayed, but I didn't want to. So, I came back." Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun indifferently with a faint smile in her eyes. She looked at Xiao Chun seriously and said, "I'm sorry for making you worry about me again." Chapter 1969. Jingyu was being too light when she said that she was worried. If Qingge hadn't mentioned that Jingyu was still alive, Xiao Chun would have followed Jingyu to the afterlife. "It's good that you're back." Xiao Chun tightened his grip on Jingyu's hand. "It seems like the 9th Imperial concubine has recovered well." Jingyu and Xiao Chun were talking when they heard a voice. They were stunned. When they turned around, they saw the Valley Master of Miracle Physician Valley, Xue Hao. He was wearing a gray robe and appeared in front of Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Jingyu was stunned when she saw Xue Hao. Wasn't Xue Hao very young the last time she saw him? Why did he seem so old even though it had only been a year? "Why are you looking at me like that?" Xue Hao calmly raised his eyebrows slightly. He looked at Jingyu with a faint smile and said, "Ninth Princess, do you think I've aged a lot?" "Valley Master." Jingyu smiled faintly and bowed slightly to Xue Hao. "Thank you for saving me, Valley Master. You don't have to thank me. I didn't save you for nothing. I have conditions." Xue Hao waved his hand casually and turned to look at Xiao Chun. "Now that the 9th Imperial concubine is safe, when will the 9th Emperors leave for what they promised me?" "Will leave when they arrive." Xiao Chun looked at Xue Hao with a calm expression. Then, he raised his eyebrows slightly and nodded at Xue Hao. "Great." Xue Hao smiled. He looked at Xiao Chun and said, "The 9th Emperor is good at dealing with people. I won't disturb you too. Goodbye." After Xue Hao turned and left, Jingyu widened her eyes slightly. She looked at Xiao Chun seriously and asked, "What did Xue Hao mean just now? What did you promise him?" When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he went silent for a while. Then, he looked at Jingyu seriously and said, "I'm just going to Miaojiang to save someone. It's not a big deal." Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu and said calmly, "What? You're going to Miaojiang?" Jingyu's eyes widened. "This debt with Miaojiang will be settled sooner or later." Xiao Chun said calmly, "I want to go with you." Jingyu frowned and stared at Xiao Chun. "No." Xiao Chun rejected without thinking. Jingyu's frown didn't relax at all. She just stared at Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu's gaze and frowned helplessly. You don't have different pupils now. I can't guarantee that you." Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu deeply and said silently, "I know what you're worried about." Jingyu reached out and blocked Xiao Chun's lips and said, "It's good that you don't have different pupils. It's more convenient to do things. If you want to go to Miaojiang, I will never let you go alone. Do you want me to go with you, or do you want me to go in alone after you go in?" Jingyu's words were said very quickly. After Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he suddenly frowned and had a headache. Xiao Chun called again. "There are only these two choices." Jingyu didn't give an inch. Xiao Chun frowned fiercely and looked at the determined light in Jingyu's dark eyes. His face suddenly became dispirited. He couldn't do anything to Jingyu. Chapter 1970. What about the children? Xiao Chun furrowed his brows in a dilemma. He turned to look at the children that Ke and Qingge were carrying. And Jingyu also furrowed her brows. "Maybe Miaoqiu and Linglan don't mind raising another child," Jingyu said seriously after a moment of silence. Xiao Chun was silent for a moment before nodding seriously. Qingge and Ku almost vomited blood after hearing Xiao Chun and Jingyu's decision. Were these two really biological parents? How old were these children? How could they abandon them just like that? This matter is very important. Jingyu looked at Qingge seriously and said, "If Madame Niet doesn't die and Miaojiang doesn't perish, the children and I might fall into danger again. Our lives might be in danger again. So, whether it's the Valley Master's request or not, we have to go to Miaojiang sooner or later. Jingyu sat on the chair and looked at Qinggu and Ku Er silently. If we go to Miaojiang and fight directly, it might be the best result. Protecting the children behind us and not letting them get hurt is the only thing we can do now. After Jingyu said that, Qinggu immediately furrowed his brows and looked at Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and the two children. He suddenly felt so sad. There were so many things that happened one after another. Looking at all these things, Jingyu and Xiao Chun couldn't live well with the children. This time, Miaojiang attacked Jingyu and almost killed Jingyu and her children. Jingyu was right. They had to dig up the roots when cutting weeds. Killing one Jing Yin was far from enough. If Madame Nia didn't die and Miaojiang didn't perish, this disaster wouldn't end. How you plan to take the children back? Qinggu frowned and asked Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Someone will come to pick them up, Xiao Chun answered calmly. Qinggu sighed deeply and didn't say anything in the end. Jingyu couldn't leave yet, and Xiao Chun hadn't arrived yet. They still had at least half a month to get along. During this half a month, Xiao Chun and Jingyu were constantly watching over the children. As though they wanted to make up for their losses, Jingyu taught the children how to speak, and Xiao Chun taught them how to walk. It was as though they wanted to teach them everything in this half a month. Ninth brother, are we really going? In the evening, Jingyu hugged little Watermelon, and Ku Er held little Potato's hand as they strolled in the open space. Xiao Chun and Qinggu stood behind them and watched from afar. Qinggu asked Xiao Chun with a deep frown. Emrich. Xiao Chun answered indifferently, his gaze still on Jingyu and the children. Miaojiang is famous for its goo. Ninth brother, I'm afraid it won't work if you barge in unprepared. Qinggu frowned deeply and looked at Xiao Chun silently for a moment. Finally, he seemed to have made up his mind and looked at Xiao Chun resolutely. I'll go with you. Xiao Chun suddenly stopped walking and turned to look at Qinggu with a frown. His brows were filled with displeasure. Qinggu, you're already married and have a career. No matter what decision you make, you should think about your wife. After Xiao Chun finished speaking, he turned and walked toward Jingyu. Qinggu was stunned when he heard Xiao Chun's words. Chapter 1971. Turning his head to look at Ku Er's tactful smile, he suddenly fell silent. Qinggu was very clear that Jingyu and Xiao Chun were not going to play. They were going to do something important and could lose their lives at any moment. When the sky turned dark, Jingyu coaxed the child to sleep. Only then did she heave a sigh of relief and return to her room to change her clothes. I haven't trained in a long time. Xiao Chun, come and spar with me. Jingyu changed into light clothes and smiled at Xiao Chun. Her pitch-black eyes were filled with amusement. Reaching out to pick up the spoon on the table, she smiled at Xiao Chun and said, "This is my weapon." When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he immediately raised his eyebrows in amusement. With a faint smile on his face, he calmly said, "Okay, I've been wanting to spar with you for a long time." Jingyu was very eager to give it a try. She had seen Xiao Chun's skills and Jingyu's abilities. Since she was going to be a sparring partner, Xiao Chun naturally couldn't act rashly. Outside the room, Xiao Chun and Jingyu stood opposite each other. Jingyu played with the dagger in her hand and narrowed her eyes slightly. Xiao Chun stood with his hands behind his back. His black robes fluttered in the wind. Jingyu suddenly tightened her grip on the spoon in her hand and nimbly turned her body. Her petite body didn't pause at all as she fought with Xiao Chun. Even when facing Xiao Chun, Jingyu's attacks were filled with killing intent. Her pitch-black eyes were filled with iciness, and every move she made was fatal. Xiao Chun's face was also filled with seriousness. He was constantly defending and didn't attack at all. Pay attention. Xiao Chun was silent for a moment, then suddenly reached out to grab Jingyu's wrist and launched an attack. Jingyu and Xiao Chun were locked in a fierce battle. Qinggu, Ku Er, and the others were watching with great interest. Although they couldn't tell who was the winner after watching for a long time, they didn't know why they felt that it was very fun to watch these two fight. Guess who won? The commotion here had successfully attracted the attention of the other disciples, in the Miracle Medical Valley. When they saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun fighting, all of them widened their eyes and asked curiously, "Is there need to ask? It's definitely the ninth emperor's." A person beside him answered seriously, "I think it's the ninth imperial concubine." Another person shook his head firmly and said, "The ninth emperors must have given way to the ninth imperial concubine. Therefore, the winner must be the ninth imperial concubine." That's right, that's right. When this sentence was said, there was instantly a chorus of agreement. The ninth emperors is so considerate towards the ninth imperial concubine. The winner must be the ninth imperial concubine. Everyone agreed that Jingyu was the winner. However, when Qinggu heard this, he shook his head seriously. The ninth emperor wasn't someone who would go easy on a woman. Qinggu sighed and shook his head as he continued to watch silently. I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to fight anymore. Jingyu loosened her grip slightly and took a step back while panting. You've died 35 times. Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu and said seriously, "You've also died 21 times. Jingyu glared at him. Her unhappy expression made Xiao Chen's eyebrows curl slightly. Then he said happily, "To be able to achieve such a result in my hands is already very good." Chapter 1972. Xiao Chun. Jingyu gritted her teeth and pounced on Xiao Chun without using any techniques. "Be careful." Xiao Chun quickly reached out to support Jingyu. Without hesitation, Jingyu wrapped herself around Xiao Chun. She looked at Xiao Chun proudly and said, "Now you've been chopped into 8 pieces." Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu with a faint smile in his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he said, "Yes, I've chopped you into 8 pieces. You." Jingyu looked at Xiao Chen's serious expression and felt a burst of anger. She turned around and followed Xiao Chun back into the house. After the first day, a few days passed. After Jingyu and Xiao Chun coaxed the children to sleep, they would fight in the courtyard as if they were practicing their moves. How many days had it been? Jingyu had not won even once. This thought almost drove Jingyu crazy. "Why can't I beat you?" Jingyu swung her wet hair and looked at Xiao Chun with a conflicted expression. When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he went silent for a moment. Then he frowned seriously and said, "You're doing very well." In Xiao Chen's opinion, it was normal that Jingyu couldn't beat him. However, when Jingyu heard Xiao Chen's words, she became even more conflicted. "No, I must beat you," Jingyu said with determination. When Xiao Chun saw Jingyu's expression, he raised his eyebrows in amusement. "Okay." Then Xiao Chun calmly agreed. He reached out and pulled Jingyu over. Then he gently helped Jingyu dry her hair. The house was silent. Jingyu lazily leaned on Xiao Chen's body. She slightly raised her eyebrows, and there was a faint smile in her eyes. "Xiao Chun, do you have any other plans for entering Miaojiang?" Jingyu looked up at Xiao Chun and asked. "No." Xiao Chen's hand paused slightly when he heard this. He silently replied, "It's not easy to enter Miaojiang." Jingyu turned around and sat up straight. She looked at Xiao Chen seriously and said, "Don't you want to consider looking for Fengling?" When he heard this, Xiao Chun suddenly frowned. "If he wants to go, he will come to us," Xiao Chen said calmly. He reached out and hugged Jingyu's waist. He deeply hugged Jingyu and said with a deep frown, "I'm worried about you. Xiao Chun, you underestimate me too much." Jingyu slightly raised her eyebrows as if she knew what Xiao Chun was worried about. "Even though my otherworldly pupil is gone, what difference does it make?" Jingyu shrugged indifferently. She looked at Xiao Chun seriously and said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." "Okay," Xiao Chun silently responded. He slightly narrowed his eyes and sniffed Jingyu's scent. The corner of his mouth hooked up into a faint smile. He leaned over and kissed Jingyu's lips and said, "The most important thing now is to have a good rest." When Xiao Chun said the words "have a good rest," he said it especially forcefully. Suddenly, Jingyu felt her heart tremble fiercely. Looking at Xiao Chen's dark eyes, she already knew what Xiao Chen was thinking. She raised her hand and hooked Xiao Chen's neck. The sleeve slid down, revealing Jingyu's white wrist. A pair of dark eyes, under the dim candlelight, flashed with a very seductive light. Her body, which was only wearing an undergarment, was so curvaceous. Chapter 1973. Xiao Chan frowned unhappily and kissed her fiercely before calming down. Jingyu snuggled under the blanket contentedly. When she woke up, the sun was already high up in the sky. Jingyu took care of herself and looked at the scorching sun outside. She frowned slightly. Xiao Chun brought in the food. After Xiao Chun and Jingyu ate and drank to their fill, Jingyu trained at the side. Training under the scorching sun was unbearable for the onlookers. Xiao Chun also accompanied Jingyu to train. Jingyu had been doing this for the past few days. Jingyu did not have anything to rely on after her abnormal pupil disappeared. She could only rely on her assassination skills. In this era without guns, it was not a bad thing for Jingyu. Ninth sister-in-law, what are you doing? When Qinggu arrived at the courtyard, he saw Jingyu holding the bow, an arrow. He immediately walked over curiously and asked Jingyu, what are you doing? The string of this bow is no longer working. Jingyu cut the string of the bow as she spoke. She frowned and asked, do you have any extra strings? I remember that Master received a roll of heavenly silkworm silk thread. I want to look for it. After so many years, I don't know where it is. Qinggu frowned as he spoke. He stared at Jingyu and said, Ninth brother, ninth sister-in-law, come take a look. See if there is anything here that can be used. Qinggu turned and walked forward. Jingyu and Xiao Chun looked at each other and followed Qinggu to a dilapidated room that looked like a warehouse. The Miracle Medical Valley has treated too many people. I remember that when I was young, the martial uncles would receive a lot of things. Qinggu swept away the dust on the door as he said, there are too many rare treasures and weapons. Master and martial uncle weren't interested in these things. They just accepted them since they were given to us. Later on, we didn't have a place to put them, so we threw them all in here. Qinggu said as he opened the lock. This place is remote, and no one would come here to tidy it up. If you have any junk that you don't have a place to put, you can throw it in here. After so many years, it is not easy to find the heavenly silkworm silk thread. Qinggu raised his hand and pushed the door open. Instantly, a burst of dust filled the room. Xiao Chun and Jingyu stood at the back and were fine. Qinggu, who walked in first, was choked and coughed. He frowned and swept away the dust. Only then did the warehouse appear in front of Jingyu. This. Jingyu looked at the pile of junk in front of her. The thing at the bottom was so dusty. How long had it been since someone came to clean it? Looking at the top, Jingyu realized that there was a window outside. The thing at the top was the latest thing that was thrown in. Obviously, these things were thrown in from the window. Is this really not a garbage dump? Jingyu frowned as she looked at the ground. Frost sword. Xiao Chun, on the other hand, stepped forward and saw a long sword stuck diagonally in the pile of things. He frowned slightly and said, 20 years ago, the famous sword that shook the world. Now, Xiao Chun looked at the rusty sword. It had not been taken care of properly, and the sword had become scrap metal. Chapter 1974. 5-Colored Bracelet. Xiao Chun looked at the items on the ground, pursed his lips tightly, and said, Golden thread robe, morning soul blade, flying guillotine. These are all treasures from decades ago, but now they've been thrown here like this. Xiao Chun sighed and shook his head slowly. There was a faint calmness in his eyes as he slowly stood up. Xiao Chun, you really know a lot. Jingyu listened to the words that came out of Xiao Chun's mouth and suddenly widened her eyes in curiosity. Xiao Chun's mouth twitched when he heard this. It's all recorded in the mainland. Xiao Chun turned to Jingyu and said, You only read stories, so you naturally don't know these things. Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun's playful gaze and suddenly twitched her mouth. Why did she feel that she was being looked down upon by Xiao Chun? Ninth sister-in-law, take a look and see if there's anything useful. Qinggu rummaged at the side and was covered in dust. He suddenly frowned and said, The people in the medical valley don't use these things. We don't go out all year round, so people from the outside world won't come looking for us. Speaking of which, I'm very curious about something. When Jingyu heard Qing Ji's words, she immediately blinked her eyes curiously and looked at Qinggu and asked, since the people in the medical valley don't know martial arts, what if you have some enemies? Or if someone wants to harm the medical valley, what would you do? Jingyu looked at Qinggu and asked. Ha ha ha. Qinggu heard Jingyu's words and immediately smiled happily. He looked at Jingyu seriously and said, if the medical valley is in trouble, will you help out, ninth sister-in-law? When Jingyu heard Qing Ji's words, she immediately frowned and said curiously, I am indebted to the Miracle Medical Valley. If the Miracle Medical Valley is in trouble, I will naturally help. That's right. Qinggu spread out his hands with a serious expression. He looked at the things on the ground and said, there are so many things here. They're all people who have been saved by the godly medical valley. Between life and death, do you think a life can be measured by these things? Miracle Physician Valley has too many benefactors. If Miracle Physician Valley is in trouble, Miracle Physician Valley doesn't have to do anything. There are countless reinforcements coming from all over the world. This is also the reason why no force dares to disrespect Miracle Physician Valley. If you offend someone from Miracle Physician Valley, you will be met with countless forces coming out to kill you. If it were you, would you do the same? Qing Ji's words were very calm. Jingyu was stunned when she heard what he said. At this moment, she suddenly felt that Miracle Physician Valley was really scary. Fortunately, the people in Miracle Physician Valley stood aloof from worldly affairs. Otherwise, it would cause a lot of trouble. Now that she thought about it, there were many rules in Miracle Physician Valley. It was probably a kind of attitude towards the outside world. The people in Miracle Physician Valley never wanted to cause trouble. They never wanted to do anything. I understand. Jingyu sighed and lowered her eyes. When Qinggu saw Jingyu's reaction, he instantly smiled happily and said, I am glad that I am on good terms with you, ninth sister-in-law. Why do you say that? When Jingyu heard Qing Ji's words, she instantly raised her eyebrows and asked Qinggu. Chapter 1975. Think about all the things that have happened in the past few years. Which one of them didn't destroy their country or clan? Qinggu looked at Jingyu seriously and said, no matter if it was the Holy Family or the aristocratic family, their end. TSK, TSK, TSK. That's why ninth sister-in-law. Qinggu looked at Jingyu and said with a smile, now that you mention it, I feel that it's a great blessing that my Miracle Medical Valley was able to save you. Ha ha ha. Jingyu heard Qing Ji's words and laughed. She looked amused and said, I'm embarrassed to hear you say that. Xiaochen looked at Qinggu and Jingyu from the side and frowned. He turned around and continued to look for things. Ninth sister-in-law, you can use this 5-colored bracelet. Qinggu looked at the bracelet and said seriously, this bracelet is full of poisonous needles. There are a total of 12 poisonous needles. The poison on them is 5-color poison. Those who are hit by these poisonous needles will have 5 different colors on their body and will eventually die. Qinggu held the bracelet and explained to Jingyu, this bracelet got its name because of this. No wonder. I was just wondering what this bracelet was. It's obviously black, so why is it called a colorful bracelet? So that's why. Jingyu nodded in understanding. She fiddled with the bracelet for a while and then reached out to put it back in its original place. The bracelet is a good thing, but it's not very useful to me. Jingyu shook her head and continued to look for things. Qinggu saw that Jingyu didn't like the bracelet and was startled. He looked around again and tried to recommend small and delicate things. However, Jingyu shook her head. In the end, Jingyu couldn't bear it anymore. Qinggu, you should just find the heavenly silk. Jingyu looked at Qinggu seriously and said, these things are not very useful to me. Qinggu frowned and said, ninth sister-in-law, you don't have any pupils now. You can take these things with you to protect yourself. Qinggu. Xiaochen turned around and looked at Qinggu seriously and said, you are the one who needs to take these things with you if you really want to go to Miaojiang. When Qinggu heard Xiaochen's words, his eyes widened in surprise. He looked at Xiaochen and asked, ninth brother, how do you know that I want to go to Miaojiang? It's written on your face. Who doesn't know? Xiao Qin smiled calmly. Qinggu touched his face reflexively. His hand was originally full of dust, so when he touched his face, it was simply too dirty. Puff. Jingyu looked at Qinggu, who had turned into a cat, and suddenly laughed. Qinggu was stunned when he heard Jingyu's laughter. He looked at his hand and suddenly gritted his teeth and roared, "Ninth brother, what is this?" Xiao Chun completely ignored Qinggu. When he saw the small box, he didn't know what it was. He raised his hand and picked it up. Jingyu and Qinggu both came over and looked at the small dusty box. It's amazing. There's actually a box for this? Jingyu said in surprise. She looked at the treasures on the ground, but there was no box at all. Ahem. Qinggu immediately coughed awkwardly when he heard this. Chapter 1976. These things were brought in boxes before, but after that, those boxes were used to store books or herbs. Jingyu and Xiao Qin's mouths twitched when they heard Qing Ji's explanation. This was really the style of the Miracle Medical Valley. Would the person who gave these things go crazy if he knew that his treasures weren't worth as much as a box? It's a ring. Xiao Chun opened the small box. There was an exquisite ring inside. I think this box was left behind because it's too small. It can't store anything, right? Jingyu looked at Qinggu with amusement. Ahem. Qinggu coughed silently. He looked at the bracelet and said, "It's also a hidden weapon. There are only 5 filiform needles inside. Each needle is highly toxic. This ring doesn't have a name, because the poison in the filiform needles is made from the venom of the flower burial snake. This ring is called the poison ring," Qinggu explained. Jingyu immediately frowned. This was really an incomparably vivid way of addressing her. "This ring is not bad." Xiao Qin nodded seriously. He reached out and put the ring on Jingyu's finger. The black ring with a faint blue glow looked so beautiful on Jingyu's fair finger. If someone gets close, this would be the best defense. Xiao Qin looked up at Jingyu and said, Yes. Qinggu nodded and said, "But ninth sister-in-law, there are only 5 filiform needles inside. Moreover, this is the venom of the flower burial snake. There's no antidote for this poison. You have to be careful." Okay, Jingyu didn't want it at first. However, it looked good after she put it on. After hearing Xiao Chun and Qing Ji's words, Jingyu could only nod in agreement. Xiao Chun and Jingyu continued to search. They chose a sleeve arrow for Xiao Chun to hide in his sleeve. Jingyu didn't know what Qinggu had taken. Anyway, Jingyu and Xiao Chun turned the warehouse upside down before they finally found the heavenly silk. Heavenly silk is the strongest silk thread. It's also very thin. The box containing the heavenly silk was thrown in the innermost corner. When Qinggu and Xiao Chun found it, everyone was covered in dirt. Good stuff. Jingyu looked at the silk thread in the box, and her eyes lit up in surprise. This heavenly silk is a sharp weapon for killing people. Qinggu looked at the silk thread carefully and said, "I remember there was a custom-made wrist guard made of heavenly silk that could be put into the wrist guard. However, I don't know who has this thing. I clearly remember someone telling me about it. How could I forget?" Qinggu frowned and thought for a long time, but he couldn't remember where the wrist guard was. "It doesn't matter." Jingyu faintly curved her eyebrows and said, "I'm satisfied with having this heavenly silk." "Okay, we found it. Let's go." Jingyu stood up and Xiao Chun nodded slightly. However, when Jingyu walked out, Qinggu suddenly stopped and called out to Jingyu, "Ninth sister-in-law, what's wrong?" Jingyu turned her head in confusion. "You use a bow and arrow, right?" Qinggu looked at Jingyu and asked. Chapter 1977. Yes, that's right. Jingyu nodded and waved the box made of natural silk in her hand. "I'm looking for this to change the bowstring. I think you'll like it." Qinggu stared at the thing hanging on the wall. It was a long bow covered in a thick layer of dust. Qinggu carefully reached out and took the bow down. He blew away the dust on the bow and wiped it clean with his sleeve. The pattern on the bow was revealed. Such a domineering totem, and the ink-red color showed that it was an exquisite longbow. "Ninth sister-in-law, look." Qinggu raised the bow and held it. With a soft sound, Jingyu and Xiao Chun suddenly saw two cold, sharp blades pop out from the bow. They were like wings on the bow, extremely domineering. Hiss! Jingyu sucked in a breath of cold air when she saw this scene. This longbow is called the Extreme Ink Bow. It was made by the most famous weapon master 50 years ago. However, not everyone can use this longbow. Chingu said seriously, if this longbow is used properly, it can be used to assassinate from a distance and kill people in close combat. The bowstring is made of natural silk. It's a sharp weapon for killing people. Chingu touched the longbow gently and faintly said, Master said that this was left behind by my father before he died. I've been thinking about who can use this longbow. Now it seems that ninth sister-in-law is the most suitable one. Chingu looked at Jingyu with emotion and handed the longbow to her. Jingyu reached out and took it. The moment she held the longbow, Jingyu suddenly felt an incomparable killing intent. Good bow. Jingyu praised deeply. This longbow was obviously stained with blood. Ninth sister-in-law, come with me. I remember that I still have arrows in my room. Chingu looked at Jingyu's fondness and frowned with satisfaction. He led Jingyu and Xiao Chun outside. Jingyu and Xiao Chun looked at each other and followed. Chingu went into his study and rummaged around. It seemed that he had forgotten where this thing was. Jingyu and Xiao Chun stood at the door and waited. Ku-Er came over with little watermelon. When she saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun, she raised her eyebrows. What is Chingu looking for? Ku-Er looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun's dusty appearance, then looked at the longbow in Jingyu's hand. She immediately raised her eyebrows and asked in confusion, Ku-Er, you came at the right time. Chingu, who was rummaging in the room, saw Ku-Er and asked happily, Do you still remember the arrow feather that I found when I was tidying up the room? Where did you put it? Arrow feather? Ku-Er was slightly surprised. She looked at Chingu and said, Didn't you throw it under the bed? Ah, that's right. Chingu suddenly realized and hurriedly ran into the room. Jingyu and Xiao Chun both frowned. This guy was really, when Chingu came out, he was carrying a large box. He quickly walked in front of Jingyu and Xiao Chun and said happily, I found it. This is it. Ninth sister-in-law, look. Chingu took out the arrow feather as if he was presenting a treasure. Jingyu looked at the arrow feather in a daze. Chapter 1978. Could it be that this wasn't an ordinary arrow feather that couldn't be more ordinary? Jingyu frowned in confusion. She looked at the arrow feather in front of her and looked at Chingu strangely. Chingu took out the arrow feather from the box and handed it to Jingyu. Ninth sister-in-law, look carefully. Jingyu looked at Qingji's serious expression and frowned slightly. She reached out to take the arrow feather and looked at it carefully. Finally, Jingyu discovered that this seemingly intact arrow had actually cracked. No, it didn't seem to be as simple as cracking. Ninth sister-in-law, try to shoot an arrow. Qingji's lips curled into a smile as he instructed Jingyu. Be sure to aim properly. Shoot at that tree. Okay. Jingyu nodded slightly. Don't use too much strength. Chingu said again silently. Jingyu nodded slightly and held the arrow up. She suddenly shot out. The arrow streaked across the sky, and under Jingyu and Xiao Chen's stunned gaze, the arrow split into three in midair. It was firmly nailed to the trunk of the tree. Hiss! Jingyu looked at this scene and suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. This isn't one arrow, it's three. Chingu looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chen's expressions and nodded with satisfaction. Seeing that Xiao Chun and Jingyu were so shocked, Chingu raised his head proudly. Good heavens! Jingyu ran to the trunk and saw that there were three arrows firmly nailed to the tree. Probably because Jingyu didn't control her strength well, only one arrow was nailed to the trunk. As for the other two arrows, one had pierced through the bark and was stuck slanted. The other arrow was hanging on the bark and would fall at any time. Jingyu looked at the three arrows and raised her hand to pull them out. She then realized that the arrow feather was split and had a different shape. It wasn't round. So the arrow feather gate is here. Jingyu's eyes lit up. Qinggu and Xiao Chun also walked over with faint smiles in their eyes. Ninth sister-in-law, what do you think of this gift? Qinggu looked at Jingyu with a smile and said, this set of bow and arrows was made by the most famous weapon event. No one used it before, but now it has finally found an owner. Qinggu, this is what your father left for you. Jingyu frowned and said, although she liked it very much, when she thought that Qingji's father had left it for him. Huh? Qinggu looked deeply at Jingyu and said, if my father knew that this treasure had found an owner, he would be very happy. Ninth sister-in-law, this thing is suitable for you. Jingyu opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she was stopped by Qinggu. He looked at Jingyu seriously and said, ninth sister-in-law is half a teacher to me. If you don't want to accept it, why don't you promise me one thing? Qinggu seemed to have thought of something and asked Jingyu carefully. Go ahead. Jingyu nodded slightly and answered seriously. It's like this. Qinggu felt strange when he was about to say it. He looked at Jingyu carefully and asked, ninth sister-in-law, can I give these things to the disciples of Miracle Physician Valley for the surgery that you gave me? I promise. The people in Miracle Medical Valley will definitely not leak it out. Qinggu looked at Jingyu very seriously and said with a hint of nervousness in his words. Chapter 1979. That's it. Jingyu frowned when she heard Qingji's words. She looked at Qinggu and asked, that's all you wanted to tell me? Yes. Qinggu smiled shyly and said, I've always kept this a secret. Master asked me where I learned it, but I didn't tell him. I also didn't show this skill to anyone. Jingyu looked at Qinggu speechlessly. She sighed and said, I was willing to give this to you so that you could pass on this skill. I didn't expect you to keep it. This time, Qinggu was stunned. He looked at Jingyu with fear and asked, I can give it to someone else. Of course. Jingyu looked at Qinggu with a smile and said, I only know how to perform simple surgeries. I can't teach you much, but you're so smart, you'll definitely learn more. In the future, it's only a matter of time before you can perform craniotomy and replace the brain. Hiss! Qingji's eyes widened when he heard Jingyu's words. He looked at Jingyu with fear and asked, can I really do that? No one dared to say that they could perform craniotomy and replace the brain. But now, Jingyu said out loud. It was so frightening, and it made people's blood boil. Yes. Jingyu nodded firmly. She looked at Qingji's fiery eyes and suddenly thought of something. She said with a serious expression, but there's one thing I hope you can remember. Ninth sister-in-law, please say it. Qinggu looked at Jingyu and suddenly became serious. I hope you can remember that you're just a doctor. You can't just stand by and watch if you can save someone. If the treatment fails and leads to death, you've done your best. I don't want you to play with people's lives and conduct research. Jingyu looked at Qinggu. If I find out that you've turned this surgery into a life-threatening research, I won't hesitate to kill you, or even all of you. Jingyu's words were full of murderous intent. She didn't hide anything and said it directly. It was normal for Jingyu to have such thoughts. In modern times, there were many medical geniuses who did not hesitate to sacrifice countless lives in order to research something. They kept saying that they should support this research. This was the scene that Jingyu did not want to see the most. So, to prevent this from happening, Jingyu had to give Qinggu a warning. Qinggu has learned his lesson. When Qinggu heard Jingyu's words, he was shocked. This kind of situation could really happen, especially under such circumstances. How many people in Miracle Physician Valley studied medicine their whole lives? If you want to do research, you should get the consent of the patient's family and yourself, or be willing to donate the body. Jingyu looked at Qinggu with burning eyes and said, in the future, you'll know that any organ in the human body can be exchanged. But before you come into contact with this field, don't try it. You'll be in big trouble. Jingyu looked at Qinggu seriously. I understand. Qinggu nodded solemnly. From Jingyu's words, he could feel the mystery of medicine. There were too many things waiting for Qinggu to discover and research. Chapter 1980. Then, how did Jingyu know all this? Qinggu had never thought about it, because in Qing Ji's eyes, Jingyu knew all this as if it was a very normal thing. This feeling, he didn't know why, but it was just so natural. Is this your request? Jingyu asked in confusion. Perhaps this isn't much to Ninth Sister-in-law, but to Miracle Physician Valley and the entire world, this will be the most significant change in the medical world in history, Qing Gu said solemnly as he bowed to Jingyu. This is something that can't be measured by money. Seeing Qing Gu like this, Jingyu felt embarrassed. She lowered her head and waved her hand. You don't have to be so polite. Since you said so, I'll accept these things. Now is not the time to decline. The land of the Miao Stockade Village is extremely dangerous. These are my protective talismans. Jingyu smiled and said happily. Ha! Ninth Sister-in-law, if you need anything, just let me know, Qing Gu said bluntly. Xiao Chun frowned at the side. He looked at Jingyu and Qing Gu and said unhappily, Why do I feel like I'm an outsider? Ha ha! Jingyu and Qing Gu both laughed when Xiao Chun said that. Jingyu and Xiao Chun returned from a rewarding journey. Jingyu studied the longbow and arrow like they were treasures, while Xiao Chun played with the arrow in his sleeve. He didn't expect there to be so many treasures in Miracle Physician Valley. These aren't much. Xiao Chun seemed to know what Jingyu was thinking. He put down the arrow calmly and turned to look at Jingyu. The amount of poison in Miracle Physician Valley isn't inferior to the poison sect. I know. Jingyu silently put down the things and turned to look at Xiao Chun, saying, These can save people and also kill people. Doctors are really scary. Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows slightly. After a moment of silence, he said seriously, In another 4 to 5 days, the disciplinary guards will be outside the Miracle Physician Valley. It's time for us to set off. Yes. Jingyu nodded her head slowly. There was a faint light in her dark eyes as she said, It's time to put an end to this. The news about you has already been sent back to the Imperial City. I believe that the Empress and Shangwan Linglan have also received it. I wonder if Third Xing will be able to bring a letter when he comes. Xiao Chun tilted his head slightly and looked at Jingyu as he spoke. As long as Miaoqiu and Linglan don't have to worry. Is Big Brother and the others all right? Jingyu slowly sighed in relief as she looked at Xiao Chun and asked, Yes. Sister-in-law gave birth to a little son. Shangwan Linglan gave birth to 2 daughters. They're twins. Xiao Chun said calmly. Jingyu's eyes widened when she heard this. Then, as if she had thought of something, she looked at Xiao Chun with hidden bitterness. Why didn't he let her give birth to 2 children at once? How envious, jealous, and hateful. Jingyu sighed deeply. Xiao Chun silently turned his head away and didn't say a word. Just as Jingyu and Xiao Chun were talking, they heard a knock on the door. Then, Xue Hao's voice rang out. Jingyu immediately raised her voice to let him in. Valley Lord, what brings you here today? Jingyu raised her hand slightly, indicating for Xue Hao to sit down and talk. Xue Hao sat down on a chair and placed the things in his hands on the table. Chapter 1981. I'm here to give something to the 9th Imperial Concubine, Xue Hao said as he raised his eyebrows. Give something? Jingyu was stunned when she heard this. She turned to look at the box on the table and looked at Xue Hao with a puzzled look in her eyes. I heard that the 9th Imperial Concubine and the 9th Emperors found the heavenly silk in the valley. Xue Hao smiled and asked Jingyu. Jingyu raised her eyebrows and nodded. She looked at Xue Hao strangely and asked, Does the heavenly silk belong to you? You're here to ask me for the heavenly silk? Jingyu stared at Xue Hao with her eyes wide open. Xue Hao was the Valley Master of Miracle Medical Valley. Everything belonged to him. Of course not. Xue Hao laughed when he heard Jingyu's words. He said calmly, I'm here to give this to the 9th Imperial Concubine. This is? Jingyu asked as she watched Xue Hao push the box to her. She frowned and stared at Xue Hao. This is the heavenly silk wrist guard. Xue Hao watched Jingyu open the box and said calmly, I got this wrist guard by chance. I've always kept it by my side. It's useless. Since the 9th Imperial Concubine was lucky enough to find the heavenly silk, it's a perfect match with this wrist guard. Heavenly silk wrist guard? Jingyu paused when she heard this name. She frowned as if she thought of something. When Jingyu got the heavenly silk, Qingge mentioned this heavenly silk wrist guard, right? That's right. Xuehao nodded slowly. He looked at the silver wrist guard and said calmly, I believe you'll know the use of this wrist guard. Jingyu silently picked up the sky silkworm wristband. The silver wristband looked very exquisite, and there were layers of hidden compartments on the wristband. Place the natural silkworm silk in here and tie it to this hidden hook. It can be ejected out and hook onto external objects, shooting out the natural silkworm silk. Xuehao gave a brief introduction. Jingyu watched it and studied it for a while. Suddenly, her eyes widened. This wrist guard is so high-tech. It seemed a little simple, but for Jingyu, who had no internal strength at all and didn't know Qinggong, it was simply an invincible good thing. Jingyu studied it silently for a moment before she suddenly looked up at Xuehao and Xiao Chun and asked, This natural silkworm silk is so thin. It won't break, right? Xiao Chun. Xuehao. After Xuehao left, Jingyu carefully put the natural silkworm silk into the wrist guard. She looked at the wrist guard on her hand. It was so fitting, and it was a pair of half-black gloves. Jingyu was instantly satisfied. Good heavens, this is so cool. Regardless of whether it's the wrist guard or the gloves, they're made of extremely special materials. They won't cut your hands, Xiao Chan said with a slight smile when he saw how happy Jingyu was. Emma, using the natural silkworm silk to kill people seems pretty good, Jingyu replied with a smile. Everyone naturally knew that Jingyu and Xiao Chan were about to leave. Although Little Potato and Little Watermelon weren't very sensible, they seemed to have sensed something. During the few days when Jingyu and Xiao Chan were about to leave, they were especially close to Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Jingyu was very reluctant to part with them, but she couldn't do anything about it. Xing San arrived quickly. After sleeping for more than a year, Jingyu and Xiao Chun finally stepped out of Miracle Physician Valley. Xuehao and Yuan Yang sent them off at the door. Ku Er's eyes were filled with worry. Chapter 1982. However, she didn't say anything to persuade them to stay. Her resolute expression made Xuehao and Yuan Yang feel gratified. Ku Er, Qingge has always been blessed. He'll come back safely. As Qingge, Yuan Yang should have said something at this time. Ku Er lowered her eyes slightly when she heard Yuan Yang's words. I know. Ku Er raised her eyebrows. She didn't go with Qingge this time because she would stay in the valley and wait for him to come back with the child. Ku Er reached out and touched her belly. Before Qingge left, Ku Er didn't tell Qingge that she was pregnant. She knew that Qingge, Xiao Chun, and Jingyu couldn't turn a blind eye to the matters in Miaojiang. If she told Qingge, she would be more worried. Ku Er raised her eyebrows and followed Xuehao and Yuan Yang back. She felt a lot more at ease when she felt the child in her belly. On the other side, Jingyu and Xiao Chun each carried a child and walked out of the valley. They saw a patch of fog in front of them, and it didn't seem like there was a path at all. Then, Qingge stepped forward and turned off something on the ground. The fog dissipated little by little. Jingyu and Xiao Chun looked up and saw that the fog above Miracle Medical Valley had dissipated. Their eyes were filled with surprise. This was the first time Jingyu knew that Miracle Medical Valley was so powerful. It was no wonder that they couldn't find Miracle Medical Valley even if they wanted to. It was really amazing. After that, they went around in circles in the forest. Jingyu thought that they were going around in circles, but when she saw the subtle changes in the surrounding scenery, it didn't seem like they were going around in circles. They set off early in the morning and walked for an entire day before they saw the exit of the forest. This was even when Xiao Chun and Jingyu were riding horses. When Jingyu turned to look at the vast forest again, she suddenly felt that Miracle Medical Valley was too hidden. We're out. Qingge looked at the blue sky. The sky was getting darker and darker. On the road, they could see people walking or riding horses. Jingyu and Xiao Chun each carried a child and held the reins in their hands as they walked forward slowly. Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes as he looked at the small town not far away and said calmly, The small town that the guard arrived at is just ahead. Let's go. The children are probably tired and hungry. Let's go in quickly. Jingyu frowned slightly as she looked at Xiao-chun and said, "Okay." Xiao-chun nodded in response. Chinga wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He was the one who was hungry and tired. Along the way, Jingyu and Xiao-chun didn't want to rest at all. They protected the children in their arms well. Chinga wanted to listen, but no one responded. He could only accept his fate and continue walking until they were out of the forest. In this small town, people came and went. Jingyu looked at the bustling scene and suddenly felt a little dazed. She narrowed her eyes and looked into the distance. When they entered the city, Jingyu saw the two familiar people standing on the road. "Master." The people standing there were Naturally Interrogation Officer 3 and Interrogation Officer 15. When they saw Xiao-chun, they quickly went forward and bowed. Then, their gazes landed on Jingyu. They looked at the familiar face of Jingyu standing in front of them. It was so vivid. Chapter 1983. "Madam." 3rd Xing and 15th Xing bowed excitedly. "No need to be so courteous. Long time no see." Jingyu nodded slightly at the two of them. Her eyes were very calm. That pair of pitch-black eyes were no longer golden green, which made the two of them dazed for a moment. Then, they bowed and led Xiao-chun and Jingyu into the inn. After running around for a day, they could finally rest. After feeding the two little fellows, Jingyu and Xiao-chun went to eat, leaving the secret guards in the room to look after the children. The children had just eaten their fill, so of course, they didn't want to sleep. Thus, they crawled around the bed and played. The bed was filled with all kinds of toys that Chingu had brought. The two children were having a lot of fun playing with them. However, as they played, they suddenly stopped. The two children looked suspiciously at the two masked men in black standing by the bed. "Dad! Dad?" Little Potato looked at the two men in black in a daze. After hesitating for a long time, he suddenly called out to them. When he called out, "Dad," the two of them almost knelt down. "Eldest young master, we didn't," one of them said quietly, holding back a strange feeling. "I want to hear a story." Little Potato didn't care what this person said. With his pink little face, he stared at the guard in front of him and said, "Uncle Chingu can tell stories. Tell me one too." Little Potato seemed to be very happy. Without a care in the world, he straightened his body and stared at the two guards in front of him with a serious expression. Little Watermelon also tried his best to crawl to Little Potato's side. He widened his green eyes and looked at the two guards. The two guards looked at Little Potato, who was staring at them. They instantly frowned and looked at each other. Then, they held their breaths and racked their brains. How were they supposed to tell this story? They only knew how to kill people. Were they supposed to tell these two little masters how to kill people? Without a doubt, if they said that, they would definitely be beaten to death by their masters. The room was filled with silence. "I want to hear a story. I want to hear a story." When Little Potato saw that the two guards were silent, he pouted and was about to cry. His eyes were filled with tears, and the two guards were stunned. "Wah, I want to hear a story. Sob, sob, sob. The bad guy won't tell me the story. I want Daddy and Mommy." Little Potato burst into tears. Little Watermelon, who was prepared to listen to the story, silently turned around and crawled to the side after hearing Little Potato's cry. After Little Potato cried for a while, he turned his head and saw that Little Watermelon had stopped crying. His face was still wet with tears. He blinked his eyes and looked at Little Watermelon, asking confusedly, "Why aren't you crying? Little Watermelon, why aren't you talking to me?" Little Potato saw that Little Watermelon was ignoring him, and he felt even more wronged. "Little Watermelon, I don't know how to speak yet, okay?" Little Potato saw that Little Watermelon was ignoring him and instantly got angry. He reached out and snatched the toy in Little Watermelon's hand. Little Watermelon wasn't angry and continued to play with another toy on the bed. Little Potato snatched it again. After a round of fighting, all the toys on the bed were snatched by Little Potato. Chapter 1984. Little Watermelon sat on the bed and blinked at Little Potato. He didn't say anything. "All right, I'll give you one." Little Potato seemed to think that he was very generous. He took out a toy that he didn't like from the pile of things that he had taken and handed it to Little Watermelon. Little Watermelon looked at the thing that was handed over. His pink face was full of disdain. He didn't even reach out to take it. Instead, he quietly crawled to the side and fell asleep. Little Potato also saw that his thing wasn't taken and was instantly unhappy. He insisted on giving the thing to Little Watermelon. Little Watermelon threw it away in disdain. Little Potato stuffed in again. In the end, Little Watermelon seemed to be angry. He pulled Little Potato onto the bed and looked like he was going to sleep together with him. Little Potato struggled for a while, but realized that he couldn't break free. Then he kicked the things on the bed away with his short legs and fell asleep contentedly. The two people standing by the bed silently twitched their lips. They reached out and covered the two little guys with the blanket. Downstairs, Jingyu and Xiao Chun had just finished their meal. Jingyu leaned on the chair calmly and lowered her eyes quietly. "Do you understand what this king said?" Xiao Chen's voice was very calm and cold. "Only Xing, San, and 15th will be coming to Miaojiang this time. The rest will be escorting the two young masters back to the Imperial City." "Yes," Xing San replied with his head bowed. "Go and prepare well. We will set off early tomorrow morning," Xiao Chun said coldly. "Xiao Chun, will the children really be fine in the Imperial City?" Jingyu asked worriedly. She still felt uneasy. However, seeing Xiao Chun like this, she thought that nothing would happen. Xiao Chun seemed to know what Jingyu was worried about. He calmly reached out and held Jingyu's hand. "Don't worry." Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu quietly and said, "The child has the protection of the Imperial Guards. She will be even safer after returning to the Imperial City. You don't have to worry." And since Xiao Chun said so, it should be fine. You, on the other hand. Xiao Chun turned to look at Jingyu and said, "More than a year ago, I announced your death to the world. I thought that if you were to hide, you would be a great weapon." Jingyu's mouth twitched when she heard Xiao Chen's words. What did Xiao Chun just say? Announcing her death to the world? In other words, she was a dead person now? What the hell? Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun with a conflicted expression. Looking at the latter's calm and serious expression, the corners of her mouth twitched violently. She simply couldn't stop herself from wanting to kill someone. So, she was a dead person now? Why didn't I think of this? Chinga looked at Jingyu happily and said, "Now that everyone thinks that Ninth sister-in-law is dead, there might be a surprise if Ninth sister-in-law hides. Moreover, Ninth sister-in-law's eyes are black now, so it will be easier for her to hide." Jingyu was speechless. Looking at Chingu and Xiao Chun nodding seriously, Jingyu sighed deeply and didn't say a word. It seemed that it was too late to say anything now, right? When Jingyu and Chingu returned to the room, they saw the two children sleeping soundly. The two secret guards in charge of watching over them silently bowed when they saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.